I began the production process for Wings of War with the basic modelling of its key features using Blender. Shown here are the wheel, engine cowling and propeller models of the biplane, with the entire plane model being completed over the course of around 2 weeks. As the most important vehicle in the project, it required a greater level of detail, which can be seen in the curved propeller, nuts and bolts on the propeller hub, and the high quality textures on the body of the aircraft. I used image textures for the wood struts, wings, body, propeller and rudder, and I used procedural textures for the wheel and metal parts of the structure. I utilised a follow path constraint here, which created a smooth flying animation that I used in the final plane crash scene. The anti-aircraft gun also required a detailed 3D model, as it is only seen in a close-up shot. I imported several reference images from different angles in order to make the model as accurate as possible. Voronoi texture nodes were used here in order to create the subtly rusted look on the gun. The AA gun was animated in such a way that it bounced as it shot and turned, which simulated recoil. This modelling phase was followed by a large number of 3D simulations, especially explosion and fire simulations. I purchased the Houdini Indie license to create these at a high quality and degree of difficulty. Here you can see my experiments with different lighting conditions and smoke effects. I ended up using this specific ground explosion simulation in the final shot of the project. I created a cloud in Houdini by converting a scattering of ellipses into a smoke volume. I then exported the cloud as a VDB file, which I was able to use to fill in the sky in the majority of the shots in the project. I simulated this aerial explosion in Houdini by first taking a circle mesh, then adding noise and randomly selecting a portion of the vertices. The normals for these vertices were then randomized for both height and direction, which created the velocity for a particle network. I then converted these particles into a smoke volume and meticulously adjusted the values for density, temperature and color in order to create a central fireball with a black smoke plume around it. This explosion simulation was one of the most difficult features to create, as I lacked experience in Houdini and it was impossible to work in real time. Every time an adjustment was made to the simulation, it had to bake again, which could take several minutes. The fact that I was unable to use Houdini on the PCs at school, alongside long render times and these other drawbacks, meant that it took several weeks to perfect this sim. I added smoke trails to make the explosion more realistic, and I did this by adding a cube with a noise node and emitting noise from the parallels of its edges. This smoke trail simulation combined with a core explosion resulted in a combined 30 million voxels. This aerial explosion was rendered separately from the Blender animated scene it was a part of. I had to import it as a separate layer in Adobe After Effects, where I adjusted the color and size of the explosion to fit the scene. I added the billowing smoke shelf tool from Houdini to a torus shape to create a crash site for the plane that is visible from the sky. I exported this as a VDB file and imported it into Blender in order to maintain consistent lighting with the rest of the landscape. I created these fire simulations using the quick smoke effect in Blender, as it is more intuitive than the Houdini counterpart and didn't require me to swap the files between the two softwares. After completing the simulations, I began developing the environments. This first landscape was created using the ANT landscape add-on. I extended the size of the landscape to create a larger sense of scale, then used image textures to make it more realistic. A particle system of transparent planes was used to create fog while keeping the render times shorter. I used a simple deform modifier to bend the trees, using a reference video of trees being hit by a shockwave to make it more realistic. I used a cloth simulation to make the biplane's broken cables fall realistically. In the final render of the anti-aircraft gun scene, several frames had these unintended streak artifacts from the emission shader of the bullet. To fix this, I had to go through each affected frame and touch it up with content-aware fill and clone stamp in Photoshop. This was done to around 20 frames out of 150 total. I utilised geometry nodes here in order to make the realistic animated bullet holes. The shader made the edges of the bullet holes yellow to convey the heat. This animation was used as the main feature of the intro sequence. Geometry nodes were also used here in order to create a simple animated grass patch, which was adopted into the final close-up scene for realism purposes. It was much less computer intensive than a particle hair system.